Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Before we start the podcast today, I just want everybody to know that Sam Adams is being a real trooper. He's talking with us today despite the fact that he has a really bad cold and a cough. So with that understood and taking that into consideration, John, if you wouldn't mind starting the show.
The 96th Academy Awards are almost with us, kicking off on the evening of March the 10th. Here to talk about the nominations, the controversies, and the Oscars' attempts to stay hip and relevant, if they can, is Sam Adams. Sam is a staff writer at Slate and has written on film and TV for Rolling Stone, IndieWire, the LA Times, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he and I were once colleagues. He has more than 20 years of experience writing criticism and features for print and the web. He is the man when it comes to film, TV, and all their transmogrifications. Welcome back to the musical Innertube, Sam.
Thanks so much for having me back.
So, Sam, every year at this time, when the Oscars start rolling around, there seems to be political expectations or political controversies or political something, people waiting for some kind of statement. I'm wondering if this time you are expecting anything of that sort to happen for this go round.
My sense is probably not. I mean, the main controversy, so to speak, the main sort of political issue in the wind right now is what's going on in Israel and Gaza, and there's been a pronounced silence from virtually the entire entertainment industry, like since the last 5 months. So people have certainly called for actors and directors to sort of speak up on that. And they've, with extremely few exceptions, declined. So other than that, unless somebody takes the bold stance of, we'll talk about this later, but if, for example, the 20 Days in Mariupol, which is a documentary about the war in Ukraine, wins, someone might get up on stage and say something negative about Putin, which is not exactly high stakes for the Oscars are concerned. But other than that, it does not seem like a year when there's people are likely to speak out about much of anything.
What about the films just in general? Do you think this is a good year?
I mean, I think last year was an extraordinary year for movies. I've been sort of flogging this idea for several months now. I think, people made up their top 10 lists and they look really good, but I'm not sure that there's been quite enough noise about that. I was relieved when some of my favorite movies that I saw last year got pushed. Their release dates got moved in 2024 because I was already having time kind of fitting everything on the list. And I think the Oscars reflect that. I mean, we're likely to have at least, Oppenheimer hasn't officially won Best Picture yet. But we're about to have, our most popular Best Picture winner in over 20 years since, Return of the King in 2003. So it is a year of, having the movies are back, baby. Like we, had a lot of great movies and some of them did extremely well in theaters of all places.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned that because I was just reading that the second installment of Dune had a tremendous weekend and sort of woke up the rather somnolent box office, which is usually sort of a little bit, down this time of year. Don?
Sam, this is the first Oscars since the strike of last year of the writers and the actors. Do you think everybody's kind of glad to be back at this point?
I think they are. I mean, there are, we've had a couple, glad to be back Oscars in the last several years, including after COVID, when everybody seemed a little, that was sort of the famously the year of the Will Smith slap. Like it felt like everybody's a little happy to be back, but a little kind of loopy and like forgot their, how to sort of their public manners. This is more of just sort of an industry homecoming. I mean, I did notice, they telecast, I guess that's what you call it. He streamed the Screen Actors Guild Awards on Netflix a couple weeks ago, which,
yes.
And a lot of the, presenters and winners sort of took, the opportunity to, particularly express their solidarity with the Guild and the union and this, successful resolution of the strike that the industry went through last year. So that may come up a little bit, but it's, they were everyone was pretty intent on kind of getting that over before, hardcore awards season started in the third quarter of last year. So I think we're fairly back to normal at this point, and we're going to be seeing, we haven't sort of in the timeline of movie making, we haven't hit sort of the lag caused by the strike, there's sort of almost 6 months when nobody was really working.
Yes.
At least on sort of major studio movies. So it's going to be interesting to see, what 2025 and 2025 and maybe 2026 Oscars look like. They may be as thin as this year's are thick.
There are several categories that just seem like they're just teeming with almost too much goodness. I'm wondering what races, so to speak, they're not really races, but that's what we make of them. Having said that, what races are you most interested in this year?
I mean, this is also a year where it feels like, and, sometimes this is wrong, but it feels like virtually all the major awards are kind of locked at this point based on the sort of, precursor awards from all the various guilds that, directors, actors, the writers, et cetera, that kind of make up the Oscars, and the other organizations like the BAFTAs and things where there's a lot of overlap in membership. It feels like virtually all the major awards are pretty well locked. I mean, the ones that I'm going to be watching for really, the few that don't quite feel that way. Best Actress in particular really felt like it was leaning in Emma Stone's favor until the Screen Actors Guild Awards, which was won by Lily Gladstone from Killers of the Flower Moon. That would be an amazing win for a number of reasons. Historic. She would be the first, Native American woman to win Best Actress. And that actually feels like, so to speak, as you said, a race at this point. So that's, what I'm definitely going to be interested to see how that comes out.
Yes, I think Lily Gladstone's performance was especially amazing since her role was rather underwritten, I thought. That she wasn't given too many lines. I was surprised at how little she appeared on screen, and yet she does manage to dominate the movie. And I'm wondering if you had the same feeling about that. There was something about the way that she bore the part and embodied it that just seemed to cast a shadow over the whole film in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is out of what she is there to do. I mean, the sort of famously, the Killers of the Flower Moon is based on a nonfiction book by David Grann, which is the subtitle of which is, and the birth of the FBI. So that really, the book is very much built around, as a work of nonfiction, built around the FBI investigation into, or, what was then becoming the Federal Bureau of Investigation at that point, into the Osage murders. And that was sort of the structure of the engine of the script in the first version. And particularly after Martin Scorsese went and talked to a number of those sort of present day Osage consultants, they reworked the script to make Molly, Lily Gladstone's character, and Ernest Burkhart, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, to make their sort of love story more central to it, and not make it about kind of the white people who killed all these Native Americans. So, as a result of that, I mean, it is hard to, even as a work of more creative nonfiction, the film can only give us so much of Molly Burkhart because, she's just not, we don't have sort of the historical record of her that we have of the FBI. But as you say, there's just a tremendous kind of soulfulness to that performance. And a real kind of quiet strength to it, and I think it's tremendous for that reason. And I know when the movie first came out, when it became clear that they were going to be running her for lead actress instead of supporting, because you could make an argument just by screen time that it goes either way.
Sure.
People kind of waffle on that, and I sort of and some of it is strategic, I think, too, with every awards campaign. But the second time I watched the movie, I was very much had my mind on that. I'm very satisfied that it's a lead performance at this point. So
this is the summer after Barbenheimer. And as we get closer to the awards, the big moneymaker, Barbie, seems to have faded behind Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer looks like it's ready to swoop in and take a ton of Oscars this year. It has the most nominations. What about that and the whole controversy of not getting Greta Gerwig her Best Director nomination?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think the sort of the quote unquote snub of Best Director for Greta Gerwig is sort of overplayed. I mean, you have a system now where there are 10 Best Picture nominees and there are 5 Best Directors. So the minimum number of quote unquote snubs you can have in Best Director is 5. The fact that, and Greta Gerwig is personally nominated for an Oscar, not just her movie. She is nominated with her partner Noah Baumbach for adapted screenplay. And Margot Robbie, who was also not nominated for Best Actress, is nominated as a producer for Barbie, and she really, this isn't one of the things where they just sort of put the actor's name on the film as a vanity card. Like, she really developed this movie. She is the one who kind of suggested Greta Gerwig for it in the first place. She really, I think it is as much an achievement for her as a producer as it is for an actor. So those feel like legitimate recognition, for me. But but as you say, it does seem like Barbie is likely to go home, possibly empty-handed. I think it's going to win song.
I was just going to say it's going to.
Yes,
it's got. Yeah, I love the 2 songs from Barbie, and when you have 2 songs in the competition, that's twice the possibility you win.
Right. It is, yeah. But it is sort of does feel like pretty weak recognition for, a movie that made almost $1.5 billion, has 8 Oscar nominations. To go home with 1 for song, feels a little kind of like weak tea. But it does seem likely to go that way. And it's also possible the Killers of the Flower Moon, if Lily Gladstone doesn't win, may be like Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, may go home with a whole lot of nominations and actually no wins. So it's, they sort of spread the wealth when it comes to the nomination, but it seems like they're really zeroing in on a much smaller group of actual winners this year.
There are blockbusters in the Best Picture nominations this year, as there always are, with things like Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon, Poor Things, which was sort of an oddity. It's kind of a blockbuster / small film. It's a small film with a core story, but it's done with all sorts of it's filmed with all sorts of fantasy elements. But then we have the smaller pictures, American Fiction and The Holdovers.
Past Lives.
I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure that and Past Lives. Yeah, you're right. I'm sure that the American Fiction and The Holdovers will fare better in the acting categories than they will in the Best Picture categories? Or do you think the steamroller like Oppenheimer is just going to take everything and leave everybody else out in the cold?
Well, I think Oppenheimer is going to take everything, and it does look at this point. If you were going to, this is where we get into me not understanding how gambling works very well. But if you were going to put money on one race, I think Divine Joy Randolph for supporting actress in The Holdovers, and that is a stone cold lock. I think it would be by far the biggest upset of the night if she didn't win that. But she's going to. So it does look like American Fiction is pretty likely to get adapted screenplay on this point, based on how, first base of all of them, the quite surprising number of nominations it got in the first place. There's clearly a lot of affection for that movie in across the various guilds in the Academy. That's it does look like they're going to go sort of one apiece for those two, but it also too bad for Barbie that the Academy likes. First, that the Academy likes American Fiction so much, and that they ruled that Barbie's an adapted screenplay because they tried to submit it for original, and they were sort of turned down.
Wow. Yes, I think also, I don't know if you think of Barbie as a comedy, but comedies don't fare well in Best Pictures anyway.
No, they certainly don't. And I think this is a movie where, it's. I think of one way that I think of the Oscars a lot is these are industry awards given by an industry to itself. And they are, among other things, they're really an expression of how the movie industry kind of wants to see itself. I think it is their way of putting forward, sort of, they're like, look what we can do. And sometimes that's a really small, intimate, personal movie. But this year they have a chance to, put forth a movie like Oppenheimer that feels, very sort of personal, but is also, huge explosions in IMAX, and made almost $1 billion. And it really just feels like, such a potent combination of all the things that the movie industry likes to do. And it is also a movie that can unite sort of the various, sort of the biggest split in the Academy now is between the sort of old guard members, and then the vast influx of members in the last 10 years when the Academy has put a tremendous amount of effort into diversifying their membership in terms of race, in terms of gender, also very much so in terms of nationality. There are a lot more international members in the Academy than they used to be. But Oppenheimer feels like a movie that can sort of speak to all those various demographics, the sort of, the old, sort of old guard who like, a real movie about manly men doing things. But then also people who like these sort of more intimate auteurist films, and also the ones who just want to see movies that get people into theaters so everybody can keep their jobs.
Yes. Yeah. I think Oppenheimer, if there was ever an epic American life, I have to hand it to the guy who invented the atomic bomb. It's interesting that this is the movie that we're looking at this year. It's just so fascinating that that's the piece of history that has snagged the imagination of so many people.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, this is I like Oppenheimer quite a lot, but it is interesting just looking over the best picture and some of the other nominees. I mean, you do have at least depending on how you look at it, I mean, 3 movies that touch on genocide of one kind or another. You have Oppenheimer, you have Killers of the Flower Moon, and then you have The Zone of Interest, which is about the sort of Nazi commandant of Auschwitz. And Oppenheimer is the one of those movies that kind of makes you feel the least bad about it. Like you don't feel like sort of guilty or wrecked after watching Oppenheimer. So it's again, I think something that kind of works in different directions at the same time very successfully.
Yeah, even though Oppenheimer feels pretty wrecked by the end of it,
Yes.
I have become death.
Yes.
One last comment about Barbie.
Sure.
Speaking of I have become death. What do you take of the situation? I saw this 100 times in 100 different memes after the nominations came out, that basically Greta Gerwig doesn't get nominated, Margot Robbie doesn't get nominated, but Ken gets nominated for a Best Actor, which is kind of the plot of Barbie, isn't it?
Yeah. My feeling about that, as with sort of Greta Gerwig, director, quote unquote snub, is I want to press the people who are saying that, like, do you really think like Barbie was one of the 5 best directed movies like last year? I mean, if you've seen all the movies that are nominated, I mean, I think Ryan Gosling's performance is the best performance in Barbie. Like, I just think that way, and that it could sort of be read to resonate in a certain way is they wrote a more interesting character for him. Ken has more layers than Barbie does. Like, that's not the fault of voters or even Margot Robbie or Ryan Gosling. Like, he just had a lot to work with, and I think it's an extraordinary performance. It's always a mistake. I mean, everybody loves to play this game, and I do it too, where you kind of look at a bunch of nominations for awards and try to extract a narrative out of them. Although the Academy is trying to say like this or that, and it rarely, it's like just not how things happen. Having been, I'm in a couple organizations, that critics organizations, that give out awards, and people will write about those sometimes and say, oh well, New York Film Critics Circle is clearly trying to say this or that, and it's just, no one is trying to say anything. It's just not how these things come together. So yeah, you can extract a narrative from it after the fact, but it is not. I think it's a little bit of a parlor trick sometimes.
We'll return to our podcast in just a moment, but first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Sam Adams has more than 20 years of experience writing film, music, and TV criticism.
He's a staff writer at Slate, and has written about TV and film for Rolling Stone, the Los Angeles Times, IndieWire, and the Philadelphia Inquirer.
He's also appeared in places such as Entertainment Weekly, the Boston Globe, Salon, the Hollywood Reporter, and he's a member of the New York Film Critics Circle and the National Society of Film Critics.
And now we return you to the musical Innertube, already in progress. I wanted to ask, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, if we have it all tamped down, who wins that one?
I mean, that's Robert Downey Jr. for sure.
Okay, good.
I mean, after everything that he's won before, I think that's an incredibly strong category. I think really almost anybody in that could win, and I would be happy with it. Ryan Gosling is phenomenal in Barbie. Mark Ruffalo's kind of comedic performance in Poor Things as this sort of oversexed buffoon. The middle-aged Rouet is just fantastic. This really kind of broad comic performance from someone that we didn't know could do something like that. De Niro in Killers of the Flower Moon. It's weird to talk about Robert De Niro being overlooked or taken for granted. What he just now has the record for the longest time between his first and most recent Oscar nominations. It's 49 years.
Wow.
He's hard to get more recognized than yet. And yet I wrote something for Slate about this a couple weeks ago. I feel like the performance has been a little, there's something a little dutiful about the nomination to me. Like when you kind of are voting and you get to the bottom of the ballot and you're into like school board or circuit court judges and you just kind of, click on all the Democrats or anybody whose name is familiar or something, like it doesn't feel like a really sincere, appreciation of the performance. It's like, you got to vote for De Niro, so vote for De Niro. And Sterling K. Brown in American Fiction as well. That to me is the least sort of interesting of the roles that are up for that, but he's such a phenomenal, charismatic presence in that movie as well.
Right.
Yeah. Again, and I would say the same thing about American Fiction that I do about The Holdovers, and that is that there are 2 or 3 key performances in there, but they all shine. They're all very good. And it would be tough for me. On the other hand, if Oppenheimer gets Best Picture, then there's no reason why Cillian Murphy and
Robert Downey Jr.
Robert Downey Jr. and Emily Blunt couldn't, walk away with it as well. I mean, that kind of sweep is not out of the question either. Let me ask you about another film that seems to have been lost in the wash, and that is Maestro. There was a lot of talk about that when it came out, and a lot of promotion by Bradley Cooper and the others involved in it, but that seems like an afterthought now.
Maestro seems pretty much dead on arrival. I think it might win makeup, by a nose, so to speak. But that is a movie that unfortunately, I don't particularly like it all that much, but I think it is also a movie that has suffered a little bit from, awards campaigns and positioning are funny things. And I think for Maestro being kind of framed, from the beginning, and it was never going to be any other way, and Bradley Cooper wants to win an Oscar so badly, you can taste it.
Oh boy.
but I feel like positioning Maestro as an awards movie kind of did it a disservice in a way, because it makes it seem like the sort of, dutiful, straight ahead great man biopic, it would have been the Oscar, frontrunner 20 years ago, but it's just not where the Academy is now. I do think it is a little more sort of interesting and idiosyncratic than that. But it's just not anywhere close to my favorite of really almost any of the movies that it's up against.
It's nice in a way to see that there are good movies out there again. There was, there have been some years that I felt that there was nothing that I thought was all that great, but there's a couple of movies that might last in this list. I think that should be encouraging to some people anyway.
Right. No, it's great. And it's also great that these, I think it's a really, pretty extraordinary crop of Best Picture nominees, even though those are not my 10 favorite movies of the last year, but some of my favorites are in there, which is often better than they usually do. And it's also really fantastic and encouraging that people have actually seen so many of these movies, whether in theaters or in other ways, and that it's, coming out as you mentioned, John, that, Dune just made, I think about $100 million over its opening weekend. It does, it feels it's, after certainly the pandemic and a number of other, factors that, made things look pretty grim for the future of, movies, particularly in movie theaters, which is still where they know how to make the most money. It's really encouraging to have not only audiences coming out, but coming out for, some of the best movies that are getting made.
Now, I would like to, right now, send my condolences to any other of the nominees in the animated feature film category, except for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Is that pretty much guaranteed to walk away with that award?
That's a slightly tricky one. I think probably more likely than not. I do think there's a decent chance, at least, that The Boy and the Heron, which is Hayao Miyazaki's, I guess, latest movie. I think the one he made before this was supposed to be his last, and then he unretired and made this and has pointedly not retired again. So hopefully there's another one after this, but at least, the latest movie from, I think probably without question, unchallenged, is the greatest living animator.
Yeah.
It's not honestly like one of my favorite of his movies, but it's, pretty incredible in a lot of ways. And still, nobody else is making movies like him, really animated or not. So there's probably a chance there. But Spider-Verse, does seem to be the favorites. And, I do think in the animation category, particularly, the industry award factor really comes in. This is, they created it, about 20 years ago, basically so they could nominate Shrek. It's, this category never been won by, they like to nominate sort of smaller independent, and films from, non-Hollywood animation studios, but they never win, because animation is, it's like a jobs program for Hollywood. It's, the thousands of people work on animated movies instead of hundreds. And I think, they're always going to vote for the entities here that employ their friends. They're not going to, vote for the ones that were made in like a warehouse in Ireland or something. So, along those lines, Spider-Verse kind of has to be the favorite for that reason, I think.
And I want to ask about the documentary, category. In past years, and it had been noted in the past 10 or 15 years, maybe even before that documentaries were becoming somewhat more important. This selection, although very good movies are incorporated, I think, as a category, seems less important this year. What do you feel?
I don't agree with that, actually. I think this is a really, really strong crop of nominees. This is a very, very challenging, we'll say, time for documentaries in movie theaters, and for really getting distribution or getting seen across the board. It's become extremely difficult to get anything that's not essentially true crime or celebrity portraits to get seen. And there has been some the controversy feels a little ginned up, and there have been certainly people complaining about the fact that some of the supposed front runners or locks for the documentary category, including American Symphony, which is a portrait of former Stephen Colbert band leader John Batiste, and still the portrait of Michael J. Fox, that they didn't make it off the shortlist into the nominees. And some of the people, notably the people who worked on the awards campaigns for those movies, were saying this is the Academy's rejecting popular movies. They're hobbling the art form by not recognizing movies that are going to draw the biggest audiences. That's nonsense. Like, having seen, honestly, I think what happened here is that the nominating committee in the documentary branch did their job, watched all 15 shortlisted movies, and picked, if not, the 5 best ones, and we can argue about 5 incredibly strong movies. This is really if you had to pick one category at the Oscars where I would say, look, just watch every movie in it, and you will not run into a bad film, it's been documentary for the last few years, now more so than Best Picture or anything else. So this, it's an incredibly strong group of nominees. And they are, quite, also sort of, politically, culturally relevant in some ways. 20 Days in Mariupol, which I mentioned, is about, the war in Ukraine. Four Daughters, which is a very sort of, interesting, hybrid, documentary as well. Eternal Memory, which I think is fantastic, which is a portrait of, a Chilean couple, centered around the older, the husband in the couple is sort of a well-known public intellectual in Chile, is dealing with Alzheimer's during the pandemic. The tremendously moving, character portrait that also touches on issues of kind of national history. So I think these are really, fascinating, well-made, interesting movies, that have, in the most case, not been particularly widely seen. Certainly in theaters. I mean, if you look over the box office numbers for them, they're pretty dismal. It's also an extremely difficult category to predict, in part because of that. You don't have, this thing with a big smash hit. These movies have been seen, if at all, on streaming platforms like The Eternal Memory is on Paramount Plus. 20 Days in Mariupol, it was on PBS, and I think it's free on YouTube now. But you don't have a sense of like what people have seen them much, and there aren't as many precursor awards. A lot of the other organizations that give out awards before the Oscars, some of them, like the Golden Globes, for example, don't even have a documentary category. So there's very little track record to go on, which makes this kind of anybody's race as far as you can tell. I mean, if you had to predict, I think the Academy might like the idea of, as I said before, of Mariupol people coming up on stage and telling Putin to go screw himself. But other than that, I don't know. But this is one where really any of the winners I would be pretty happy with.
Are we going to get another disappointment in the original score category for John Williams? He's nominated for the Indiana Jones movie. On the one hand, I don't think that's any. I mean, Oppenheimer's in there as well as Poor Things, and they both had interesting scores, but I don't know that they're necessarily better or worse than John Williams' score for the Indiana Jones movies. But he's been nominated hundreds of times and won a few. So are we going to see that again this year, do you think?
Yeah, no, he does not have a prayer, and that one's going to Ludwig Göransson for Oppenheimer. Yes. Is taking that one home. They could, pretty much start cleaning off shelf space for that now. There didn't seem to be a second in the Oppenheimer movie where there wasn't music behind him, except for the bomb explosion. Yeah, I did notice that when I was watching it.
That's an interesting point, Don, that I was aware of it too, that it was a movie. That was a movie in which there didn't seem to be almost a minute where there wasn't some musical commentary. And I found it didn't interrupt the movie at all. It was part and parcel of it. It was embedded in the film in a really nice way. But I did see that too, that the music was always there. It was almost as much as the visuals.
Right. Well, it's part of what makes Oppenheimer so interesting. I mean, it's a 3-hour movie, obviously, but it doesn't feel like one. It really kind of zips by. And I think the music, the editing has a lot to do with just the real sort of breakneck pace.
So thank you for lasting as long as you have. I can tell that you're nursing what I'm nursing, which is a cough and a throat.
Yes,
that
indeed.
is not cooperating. But thank you for that. Sam, now that we've been through the Academy Award nominees and everything, right at the end of it, is there a film that you really hope people go out to see? Can you recommend it? Doesn't have to be on the Oscar list, but is there a movie you're burning about right now that you think people should go see?
Well, since I'm in the Oscar frame of mind, and I was just talking about it, the Eternal Memory is one that in fact you don't have to go out and see. You can just put it on Paramount Plus. But yeah, that's a really fantastic movie that I think also has, at least potentially could have very broad appeal. As a really moving human story. It's a little. I don't necessarily recommend it if you have someone in your family who's dealing with dementia. It could be a little bit of a tough watch. But other than that, I mean, that's a really wonderful film that I would strongly recommend. One of my top 10 of last year.
Well, thank you, Sam Adams. I think we're going to go watch the Oscar awards ceremony with even more interest now because, as you say, it is an extraordinary year for movies. And we'll see if Oppenheimer really does, as Don says, sweep them all away.
Yep. Thank you guys for having me.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.